Welcome back to Star Wars Newsnet. I am joined this week by Miguel, my good friend Miguel, because we have some interesting stuff to talk about this week in the Star Wars TV and movie sphere. You can always find us here on Monday to start your week off with a little Star Wars. My name is Tyler. Welcome in. Here we go. So, Miguel, let's just jump right into the stuff for today. Sometimes I think we get into these slow seasons of Star Wars and the tiniest little snippet of news can feel like so much more than it actually is. But this one I think was worth raising our eyebrows on just a little bit. And Ewan McGregor, was this at LA Comic Con
Yeah.
or I believe, yes, it was LA Comic Con last week, said that in regards to an Obi-Wan Kenobi season 2, obviously he's been saying he would love to do it, but he said now they are exploring some ideas, exchanging some ideas on a season 2, and that he would obviously love to do more Clone Wars flashbacks with Hayden, anything like that. However, as someone who went to MegCon Orlando last February and follows these cons as well, his rhetoric for the most part has pretty consistently been, I would love to do a season 2. Oh my goodness. Can we, as the fans, work together and tell them we want to make this happen? Oh, it would be so much fun to play more Obi-Wan Kenobi. But this was very different than I would love to be Obi-Wan again. This was I would love to be Obi-Wan again. And there are actual conversations happening. And it's just an interesting time for him, I think, to say that, because I don't think Ewan is the type of guy that would just say that if it wasn't actually happening, given he's been doing these cons for about a year now and had basically the same thing to say at all of them. What's your initial Ewan reaction here to season 2 and them exploring ideas?
Yeah, my first thought was the timing of it all. Why now? Uh, why now? And what happened for it to change? And my first thought was the acolyte was that they were going in one direction with the shows, which was to abandon the idea of doing Skywalker saga shows all the time. And then the acolyte, whatever the reason, didn't work. And now they're like, okay, so maybe this wasn't it, and maybe we should just go back to the hits, which was Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was a hit. I think we can argue how big a hit it was, and maybe could have been bigger, maybe not. But I think it worked for them. So now they're like, should we explore that again? And under which conditions? And that's basically what I think is happening. Like I do believe even that they are discussing this. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Tommy?
I think that Ewan has clearly been absolutely vocal about wanting to come back as Obi-Wan. I think that there's been all of these little reports about, oh, Lucasfilm has, ideas for future Star Wars shows. They just haven't announced yet. Well, of course they do. And that's an easy thing to say as well. Oh, we have things in the works. I mean, how often do we hear politicians say oh, I have a plan for that. Don't worry, it's coming soon. Just, put that little vote. It seems yeah, don't worry, subscribe to Disney Plus, invest in Disney. We have plenty of things in the works. But this feels like what you said with the acolytes not doing nearly what they were hoping. What is something we can do that will be a surefire bet to at least get people to get those numbers up, to get the watches up? Because even if the story is not very good and visually it's not very good, they're going to at least pull some decent streaming numbers for, Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi, especially if you're going to bring back, some characters from the prequels or do anything involving a Clone Wars flashback. Whether we need that or not in Star Wars is a completely, different discussion, which we could talk about for a second. But I absolutely believe this. It would not shock me in the slightest if we get to April for Celebration and, we have Andor that's about to kick off. We know Ahsoka season 2 is filming, and they say the next show that is in line is Obi-Wan Kenobi season 2. That wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, I'm not saying I expect that at this point, but I expect whatever it is they do announce in the next, 6 to 8 months to be something that screams like, okay, this is a really safe option for them to explore in terms of the streaming model.
Yeah, maybe. Like, my second thought, I think, is in line with what you're saying. It was what he said about wearing the Clone Wars armor.
Mm-hmm.
And I just went back a year in time to when Ahsoka episode 5 came out, and it was
Mm-hmm.
like Hayden wearing the Clone Wars armor. It was Ahsoka in the Clone Wars era. And there were all of these fan arts of people clamoring for a Clone Wars era show, live action show,
Mm-hmm.
with these people and whatever. And perhaps there's an appetite for that. I personally do not have it, but perhaps there's like out there
Mm-hmm.
some appetite for it, and maybe Lucasfilm can actually earn some positivity from that. So whether this Obi-Wan Kenobi season 2 would actually take place during the Clone Wars era, or whether it would feature flashbacks or whatever, I think I think the second source, or the additional push forward that caused it to for those conversations to materialize was
Mm-hmm.
that Ahsoka episode 5, and the
Mm-hmm.
response that it got, and all that.
Mm-hmm. So the response was great. I have two thoughts on this. One is feels like the Acolyte was Star Wars trying to take two steps forward in
Yeah,
terms of expanding itself and its audience. It resulted, I think, in the studio is probably going to be taking like multiple steps backwards.
yeah,
And that's not me saying that the Acolyte was disserviced or a major hit, or not treated the way it should have been, because I didn't think the show was great. I thought it was fine in spots, and I would have liked to see the story continue, but I certainly understand, just monetarily speaking, why they are making other moves. But I'm talking about pushing forward, moving beyond the Skywalker saga. How do we expand Star Wars and keep it fresh and inviting? And a show of Obi-Wan Kenobi season 2 that has so many is going to be could be filled with Clone Wars like flashbacks or Clone Wars era stuff. That to me feels like we have to just play it safe, do something pretty vanilla that's going to make people uh, mostly happy, and just call it a day. I don't think that that's the direction Star Wars should be going in. I don't think that people had a problem with the idea of something outside the Skywalker saga. I think that if Lucasfilm creates just a really, really quality story that looks really good, I think word of mouth would do that. I think it would be just fine. I think the word of mouth around the Acolyte was just so bad for a lot of casual people. They just didn't want to put their time into it. With a Clone Wars flashback or Obi-Wan Kenobi season 2, I wonder if we would run into a similar situation where the same people who are saying like, oh, this is terrible, now, oh, they're just recycling the same stuff, they don't have any ideas anymore, and suddenly we have like negativity around something that felt safe. And I just don't know what Star Wars can do to squash that right now. I would love to see an Obi-Wan Kenobi season 2 if it felt like it was really needed. Like if they were able to give me this story that didn't involve Clone Wars flashbacks, that maybe doesn't involve Darth Vader at all, and it's strictly about Obi-Wan, the character of Obi-Wan, some sort of challenge that he himself is going to central to his being. And I don't even need it to involve like Leia again or Luke to some degree. It can just simply be him doing something that helps the galaxy out in a unique way that's central to his character. But I don't think that this is the right direction that we should be heading. But I think that this is where we're probably going to end up for a while.
I'm gonna disagree with you there. I don't think, like, to me, the whole concept of having an additional season of this show, now that we've explored um, Leia and Obi-Wan,
Hmm.
now that we've actually seen a high stakes story with Obi-Wan during the 19 years in
Hmm.
between Revenge of the
Hmm.
Sith and A New Hope, now that we've seen that, anything else that we see
Hmm.
that could justify a season of TV might actually diminish the sacrifice that Obi-Wan made during those years, which was to
Hmm.
seclude himself and just wait
Hmm.
around for Luke to grow up and defeat
Hmm.
the Empire. Like
Hmm.
whatever grandiose, adventure that he embarks on in a future season could actually, like, yeah, I don't know. Luke's whole purpose during those years is to stay in a cave, basically,
Yeah.
inside a cave, and then just look over Luke, and that is it.
Hmm.
And I don't know, whatever they do to contradict that, it's gonna, like, yes, season one kind of fit in with what they had set up in canon
Right.
before, but it was such a twisted way of fitting inside everything
Hmm.
that anything else that they do might actually just
Hmm.
break it all.
But when I agree, and so like when I'm watching A New Hope, that's why I don't really know what you can do for this show, like what can you do for this season, because if his whole purpose is to just watch over Luke, make sure Luke's okay, like what are we gonna have another entire show just set on Tatooine, just sitting on Tatooine, which feels like overkill for Star Wars, given how much we've
Right.
been at Tatooine
Exactly.
and how diverse and beautiful the Star Wars galaxy is. We're just going to stay on this one desert planet again. But also, I don't feel like Luke has much of a relationship with Obi-Wan prior to A New Hope. Just the way he talks about him, it seems like they might have had a few interactions, like sparse interactions throughout his life, which is why for me, like the more they interact and the more they spend time together, feels to me like more of the detraction from like A New Hope, because it seems
Yeah.
like they're learning to trust each other. Luke is kind of enamored with him. Maybe he's seen a few things, but they're going on these big adventures together, or maybe he's seeing Obi-Wan protecting him from something, you know, like how often, how surprised is he going to be when he learns about the Force and sees Obi-Wan doing things later on in his life? But I mean, more creative minds than yours or mine can come up with a great story that could somehow make that work. I just feel like moving in this direction, they would ultimately find a way for Ewan to leave Tatooine at some point. Like he would be leaving Tatooine, he would have to do something that in regard to protecting someone somewhere, and maybe that is still centered around Luke. Maybe he gets like a tip about someone knows a little bit about Luke, and he has to leave to try to track that person down before they can make contact with the. I don't know, but there seems to be, I think, a large disconnect in the fandom too about like what a season two of Obi-Wan Kenobi could look like, because I think a lot of people, didn't love the direction of young Leia even in season one. And so season two, if they just stayed and focused on Luke on Tatooine, I could see how that gets tricky as well. Which is why I think we should just move on. Let's find some like unique and different ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I think the problem here is the concept from the beginning. Like, are we making a story? Are we coming up with a story that we can make it work inside what is going
Mm-hmm.
on elsewhere? Or are we making a story because we want to tell this story because this
Mm-hmm.
is important to us? And yes, those two ideas can coexist, but I
Mm-hmm.
think that if your jumping off point is the first one, I think we're completely, like, on the wrong direction. I think
Mm-hmm.
that if you want to tell this specific story, you can probably find
Yeah.
another spot in the galaxy, in the timeline,
Mm-hmm.
to do it. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be Obi-Wan, just so you can justify
Mm-hmm.
that the selling point of the show. I don't know. It to me it feels like we're just looking for excuses to have Ewan back because everyone loves Ewan and
Yeah.
everyone wants to see that Clone Wars armor and those flashbacks.
Hmm.
Will probably also bring in Hayden, so everyone wants to see those two together again. Like I don't know. To be honest, the last flashback they were on together wasn't very good either. So
Hmm. So when I think about like Disney Plus Star Wars 2, and I think about like The Mandalorian, which launched everything, and that is a completely unique story set in the Star Wars timeline. It is beyond, the episode 6, and it was set sandwiched in between 6 and 7, and it was an entirely new set of characters. But how quickly like the Mandalorian became a worldwide phenomenon was due to the fact that it felt very fresh. It felt very new. It was something different in Star Wars, but still feeling like all the familiar beats of what a Star Wars story, somewhat feels like. And with Andor, this like I think something that's interesting about Andor is, while it brings the not necessarily the biggest streaming numbers to Disney Plus right now, but there's just like a prestige element to Andor. But also when Andor was first announced, I was sitting there going like, we're getting a show about Cassian Andor, who was a main character in a prequel movie to set up the original episode like 4 of Star
yeah,
Wars, and I'm like, why do we need this show? I don't understand like the point of this. But it was just a really great story. It was a great idea, and I am really curious to see what the season 2 streaming numbers are when it comes out, due to the good and positive, like excellent word of mouth that has come out of that show. And I think about like those shows, and I think about Star Wars taking the wrong lessons from the Acolyte, which is maybe we should invest our time again and figure out what is like something that is unique, will feel familiar, but we can really just, drive this home, versus maybe pushing something like that back another 5, 6 years and just settling in on, something familiar completely, which is Obi-Wan.
yeah. I mean, so Andrew was an interesting case study because yes, that was a huge eyebrow raiser, right? Like, why are you doing a prequel to the prequel? Like, I was describing this show to a friend a few months ago, and he was like, "Oh man, Disney cannot like do it in a more like they just like are squeezing that orange as much as they can
Mm-hmm.
just to tell the story before the story before the story." But in reality, the show was about much more than Cassian. It was
Mm-hmm.
about the inception of the rebellion, and it was, even though it's called Andor, it's really an ensemble show.
Mm-hmm.
It's about all of these characters coming together from many different places in the galaxy. And yeah, Diego Luna is the selling point of the show, but there's a lot more going on.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I think the show shouldn't even be called Andor. It should be called like Star Wars Rebellion or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like um, something that is more representative of the of what the actual story is. Because
Right.
honestly, like Cassian's story is like the second or third best part of the series. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are many other subplots that are working much better. Um, but yeah, I mean, I agree about Mando, but I also think that Mando's, let's say, uh, key ingredient wasn't really the fact that it was set in between whatever movie and whatever movie. It was
Mm-hmm.
a little green baby that was just adorable and just like took over
Mm-hmm.
the world. And I think that's what that show was so
Right.
popular.
But if that's set, I think it eliminates any other questions about if that's set in between episodes 4 and 5 or episodes 5 and 6. It leads into all of these random questions about, like, well, why is this so prevalent during this time? It maybe takes away from Luke, Leia, Han, and the Rebellion to know, versus like, okay, we can tell the story right here, and it provides like the interesting element of like trying to bring the Empire back, the remnants of the Empire. Baby Yoda is what he is the straw that stirs the drink of the Mandalorian. That's absolutely true. But I think, part of that, I think, is Yoda is gone and Yoda is no longer there. But there's still another of his species that is alive and is existing here. And the And also to uh, Baby Yoda's credit, Mandalorian brought in so many people that watched Star Wars. I think that never really watched Star Wars before or were super casual, but they watched an entire show of the Mandalorian because of how obsessed they were with these two characters.
I mean, that is true, but I will also say that what I meant is that the key to the success, the key to why it was such a global success was Baby
Hmm.
Yoda. Not that the
Yeah.
key why it worked was Baby Yoda. The show worked because of everything that you said, and also because it had interesting characters and interesting stories, and it
Hmm.
had an interesting story, like overall plot
Right.
going for it. The key why it was such a global phenomenon was mostly Baby Yoda, and it was also the fact that it was like the flagship of Disney Plus. It
Hmm.
was this is what Disney Plus is, and parents are gonna sign up for Disney Plus because they can watch Moana for just $6 a month, at least back then, on a loop, and their kids will be happy. And when they go to sleep, they can put on Star Wars, and that's why it becomes such a global phenomenon.
Hmm.
Now things have changed. I don't think they can capture that lighting in a bottle that particular way because Disney Plus is already established and because Baby Yoda is a once in a lifetime kind of thing.
It is
But
insane. I was at Disney yesterday. Like I was literally at Disney yesterday. First time I've been there in probably getting close to 2 years.
okay,
And every Star Wars store, it felt like even more so than the last like time I was there a couple years ago. It is. I told Janelle, my girlfriend Janelle, I was like, it is just. I wonder. I just want to know how much they've made just from Grogu merch. Like that's all I want to know is just how much they've made from just Grogu because it was so much. It was socks from shirts to the little plush weighted plush toys. They had everything. And there were so many we literally get out of this ride and I watched five kids like tell their dads like, "Oh, can we get the Grogu this, Grogu that?" And like three of them are like, "All right, we'll get the Grogu thing." I'm like, they have to be just rolling in the Grogu merch. And that's before we even get to a feature film where Grogu is going to be at the center of a feature film. I can't imagine what like Grogu merchandise numbers that's gonna do.
which is even crazier to think about in hindsight that for season one they were so secretive about the character that they didn't want to produce any merch about him.
Hmm.
Like they held off on any merch Grogu related for 1 year just because they didn't want to spoil the surprise. And it's like how crazy was Disney to trust John Favreau on that idea? Like seriously, like honestly, that blows my mind that he got away with that. And
Well, it blows my mind too that they got a whole bunch of kid actors who played around with Grogu for episode 4 of season 1, and none of those little kids said anything to anyone throughout this whole time. Granted, if some little 8-year-old kid came and told me, "Hey, guess what? I was acting the other day, and there's like a little baby Yoda character that's going to be in the new Star Wars," I'd be like, "Okay, kid, like go back and color your picture over there, please. Like, leave me alone." So I guess there's some to
I
that,
mean,
but
I don't know. You can ask that question about any like big spoiler in any
Mhm.
movie these days. That there are just so many people around this. That how the hell did they manage to keep this thing under wraps? And they
They've done a
managed to.
pretty good job with that with the show in general, with the
Yeah,
big
yeah.
reveals for each season, which I think makes me wonder what could be in store for the movie as well. Like what do they have in line there? But
Honestly, I'm not expecting much. Maybe I'll be
mhm,
surprised, but I'm not expect. And maybe I'm foolish to think that way because they do like those big surprises. And maybe I'm not expecting much because Mando season 3 didn't really have that many.
mhm,
And also they had hyped up Boba Fett because it had like a big spoiler in the every episode and whatever, and then it didn't. So what is
mhm,
like maybe I'm just like that's not really their thing anymore.
mhm.
But Fabro does like having those big screen surprises every now and then.
I
So
feel like this is getting off. topic we were talking about. I feel like we're gonna get a Leia recast in the Mando movie. I think that might be like I think that might be I don't know. I just have this weird feeling over the last call it my force intuition, but
I don't know. I just think it feels too soon. I
mhm.
think that I'm maybe I'm
I
just wrong
I'm
for
with you.
thinking this, but I'm thinking of this movie as just an extended episode of the show.
Mhm.
Just a harmless, 100-minute episode of the show that will feel big because it will have big set pieces, but not because of
Mhm.
its stakes.
Right. I just wonder, like, this all comes down to what they want to do to tie it into the next direction of the Ahsoka
Yeah.
season 2 and Dave Filoni's movie. So, Variety, or sorry, the Hollywood Reporter put out this piece, and it was literally titled, and it was a title that you couldn't stay away from because of just how I don't know how egregious it was, or like it felt like the most clickbaity, like almost title. It was, "Is Disney bad at Star Wars?" And what a question that is. So we're going to talk about that for just a minute. And if you reach if you reach into your like Star Wars bag of tricks and you just started pulling out like different Disney, pieces. I feel like more often than not in terms of like necessary if it's money that was generated from, this project or minutes watched in your streaming, more often than not, you're going to find a success. Like, I think as you reach in there, just given how much money the movies have made. But there's also the fine line of many ways it has been a disaster in certain areas. And so I just want to talk a minute about what were your thoughts when you just first I want to know what you thought because I know what you thought when you read it, but what was your first thought when you just saw the title? Like, is Disney bad at Star Wars? Did you say, oh boy, like here we go, like when you were clicking it, or was it a, oh, is this what's this gonna have in store for me?
It was more the second, I think. It was more like, I mean, I was looking at it from like trying to carve some news and trying to like, okay, what did THR actually say about this? Which, spoiler alert, nothing. There was nothing newsworthy in there. But as an editor of a site that is covering Star Wars news, I was looking at it from that point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But I was completely shocked by the way it opened, and the way it opened was. Kind of a really eye-opening way, which was it was calling back Ray's line in TFA, saying, when they see the Millennium Falcon, they say, oh, so they basically reach the conclusion that they have to hop on the Millennium Falcon, and they say the garbage will do, and that
Mm-hmm.
is THR's assessment of how fans are viewing Star Wars now.
Mm-hmm.
This is pretty bad, but it will have to do because it's Star Wars. And I think that's maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but I don't think they're completely off here because, and like, how many times have you actually seen someone publicly say, okay, it was, whatever happens, I'm probably gonna at least like it because it's Star Wars, which is such a low bar for them to set that Lucasfilm can basically put out anything that will at least get some views, which is kind
I
of
am one of those
impressive.
people. Like I'm one of those people that will find like there are Star Wars projects and I'm like, oh, like that's just not. I just didn't find that very good. Like there is a lot of elements in Mando season 3 where I'm just sitting there going like, man, this is a little frustrating. Like I really don't know what we're doing here. But at the same time, next week I'm queued up ready to go because I will find ways to love my Star Wars and the direction that I get it. The level of enthusiasm that I will champion those different things varies greatly. But I can say that I'm not one of those people that if this project for Star Wars doesn't appeal to me. I mean, you know me. We just finished recording, 2 months, 2.5 months of podcasts about young Jedi adventures. So like I'm tuned in. Like I'm checking it out.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just it was it goes a bit in that direction, but it's also like, yeah, it's some people are like, it's Star Wars, I'm gonna love it, and it's like, should you?
Mm-hmm.
Should you love it regardless?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think we should set some quality control here.
Yep.
Uh, Obviously, that is kind of a vanilla statement because
Mm-hmm.
yes, anything they put out should have some quality standards, and it's not easy to make any of these shows. And obviously,
Mm-hmm.
they all set out to do the best show they can. So that's also why I think that this answer of just make a good show is such a non-answer, because what do you think they're trying to do anyways? I think the how you actually attempt to do that is perhaps the most interesting thing to explore here. But yeah, to be honest, I lost my train of thought here. But yeah, I don't know, that was kind of a big way to start the
Mm-hmm.
article, and then just list all of the things that have not worked. And it's not even like quality wise, it's like how many things have they actually um, published, like actually made and put on theaters or put on streaming, and how many things have they said either on the record or off the
Mm-hmm.
record that they were going to do and they never did.
Mm-hmm.
Is, I don't know, maybe the ratio is 1 to 1, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe there are even more projects that they haven't made and said they were going to do than they have actually made, which
Mm-hmm.
is,
I thought you were
I
going a different way with that for a moment. I thought you were going to say, how many of these projects that have been put to film, have been put in TV, have come out, and we were able to, legitimately leave saying like that was just really good. Like not like
I mean,
necessarily, not
yeah, that's
necessarily
the other
like,
part.
oh, is this good Star Wars? But this was just really good.
That's the other part as well. Like, how many has there been any project that has been universally loved? I can only
Mm-hmm.
think of one, and honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of.
Rogue One.
Yeah, and I'm not even the biggest fan of that movie, but I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the only one. Like, even Force Awakens, which was like a 2 billion grosser and whatever, had its detractors that were even like how is it, like their voices were heard much louder when last year they came out, and it was such divisive. And well, actually, the Mandalorian, I guess, was also like like a 100% success on all
Mm-hmm.
on all fronts, like especially the first two
Just on a like
seasons.
a much smaller scale, which is ironic. You say that because you're obviously not the huge like biggest fan of Rogue One, and then Andor is in many ways an extension of Rogue One in a much broader scale with
Yeah,
the
right.
rebellion.
But I mean, I just think that why I'm not the biggest fan of Rogue One is for basically the first half, which I think falls apart on so many levels. And Andor was like the second half adapted into TV, being meaning by that, take out the big
Hmm.
set pieces and just focus on the themes, and that was on a 12 episode run what Andor was. Just the
Hmm.
themes of rebellion and the themes of taking down the empire and the cost of it. Whereas the first half of Rogue One also had those themes, but it was just so convoluted that it was
Hmm.
at times impossible to follow. It was
Right.
jumping from point A to point B to point C to point M. That it was like, who are these characters? Why do I care about them? And what exactly is going on here?
Hmm.
That's
There
why I'm.
was you would not consider the first couple of seasons of Mando to be like a universal success, like
Yeah,
pretty
yeah, yeah, yeah.
much.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I mean. I forgot about Manda as well,
Okay.
especially the second season. I think the first season was received well, but in hindsight, the second season worked much better. And
Hmm.
uh, like me personally, I'm kind of looking down on season one at times. I think there are a couple episodes in there that are not very good, and the other
Hmm.
ones are decent at best. Whereas the season two was just, uh, I think of 8 episodes, what 7 were spectacular, and maybe there was 1 or 2 that weren't as good, but they
Hmm.
still decent.
No,
I don't know.
season two. I love season two because it felt like there was just a common through line throughout the
Yeah,
show. and it felt like a cohesive like story that we're telling between these two people on a journey to find something, and it felt like that was maintained throughout, and I wasn't ever jarred. There was like the different side quests that they had to go on in order to make that happen, but it still all felt like intricately connected to the main through line of the story. So yeah, I would say those three as well. I guess I wasn't necessarily as listening too much online when The Force Awakens came out, but it felt like just anecdotally from my perspective and my circle and what I was at least seeing on Twitter or whatever, it felt that one was a massive success. I felt like there were some of the detractors out there. Mostly for me, it felt like the main negative stuff I saw was in regard to like Rey and, oh, why is this person so powerful all of a sudden? But it didn't feel nearly as magnified to me as everything that happened when The Last Jedi came out. Like that's when it felt like those people's voices went, from like a low volume to someone just grabbed the remote and just said, like, me crank this up to 100.
I think that's true, but in my, maybe I'm thinking of this the wrong way, but in my mind, the fact that Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker were so poorly received kind of has shadowed Force Awakens a bit. Like there are some people, and maybe this is also a vast minority, but there are some people who kind of were on board with when the Force Awakens came out, and now they look down on that movie, like they're just not that being a fan of. And I think that's also why I don't think of that movie as a giant success as maybe I would have in 2016, which by
That
all
makes
means it
sense.
was, because critically it was acclaimed, and financially it was like through the roof. So maybe it's
And
the wrong
it said
assessment.
something too when you get 2 point whatever billion dollars for this first of three movies to conclude this, saga, and then the third one makes, less than half of what the first one made. Like that has to mean something. There's always, I think to some degree there was gonna be like a little bit of a drop off, but obviously you want those numbers to keep climbing or at least try to maintain to some degree. I don't know if anything would ever top what they did the first one, just with the craziness of Star Wars being back. But to have the Rise of Skywalker make like less than half. It made $1 billion, which is like, oh, that's $1 billion. But when you think about it making less than half of what the first movie made just a few years prior, definitely has to raise some eyebrows.
I just think that was such an impossible high bar to set. Like Force Awakens making not only $2 billion, but it almost made 1 billion in the US alone, which is insane. Like you cannot compare yourself to that movie. You should compare yourself to Last Jedi, which was the more okay, this isn't Star Wars is back anymore. This is Star Wars is here, and this is big screen Star Wars, and this is what we can aspire to be. And Last Jedi maybe could have, should it had it been like a bit of a more of a crowd pleaser, maybe it could have reached 1.5, 1.6 billion. But I don't think that was. I don't think we'll ever know that. And I
Yeah.
think Rise of Skywalker should have maybe aspired to reach 1.3 billion, like Last Jedi did. Maybe a bit more because it was also the trilogy ender, which the second movie usually underperforms in that regard. But at the same time, you should not compare yourself to Force Awakens, because that was such an anomaly that you should just ignore for in the future.
What do you make of like success? Like how is Star Wars going to define success in the next few years? Like we have Andor season 2, we have Ahsoka season 2, and the Mando and Grogu in 26. I don't want to talk about Skeleton Crew because I think that doesn't really, not that it doesn't deserve to be talked about, but I think it's own little thing
Yeah.
that's going to come and go in December. But and that there's the stakes around that not nearly as high as those other three.
No, but I mean, to talk about Skeleton Crew for a minute, I think that Skeleton Crew, a success for them will be to just um, gather similar viewership to, I don't know, Boba Fett. I think if they can reach Boba Fett numbers, they will be popping in the champagne because it's a new series, all new kids. Yeah, it's a family adventure which kind of screams Star Wars, but at the same time, it's like very low profile. They're not really. They're advertising more the fun aspect of it that they are the
Okay.
actual story. So I think that just being, I don't know, maybe not even Boba Fett, like maybe just Ahsoka numbers. Or I can't remember which
Well,
one
so
was
I thought
higher.
I thought Ahsoka's numbers were past Boba Fett though.
Um, maybe so. I can't remember right now. Uh, just as long as they're higher than the Acolyte, I think it will be a success. As long as
Okay.
that's happening.
But like
Yeah.
in terms of measuring success for these others, especially like Andor's the next one up. Like, Andor has take the Acolyte out. Andor's streaming numbers were the lowest, by a decent amount in terms of minutes watched compared to all the other Star Wars shows. I think it doesn't mean it's not worth it. It's very clearly worth it given the prestige it adds to Disney Plus having it there. But clearly they are hoping that prestige and the word of mouth around Andor for the last couple of years elevates those streaming numbers significantly in season 2. So what is the bar of success, if Disney's gonna pop the champagne bottles for Andor season 2? What might that look like?
An Emmy win.
Mm-hmm.
Very simple. Like, I don't think they care as much. They do care about viewership, as you said, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't think they care as much about viewership. Like, think back to this year's Emmys. What were the two biggest winners?
Was it Shogun
Yeah,
and the
and the bear.
Bear?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
both Hulu shows. Both of them had decent viewership. They have a decent following. They are not like, um, Star Wars level viewership. I think they may be platform defining because you can associate Shogun to Hulu, you can associate the
Mm-hmm.
Bear to Hulu, but they are not like, this is what uh, a streaming show should aspire to be in terms of viewership. But they were throwing so many parties when the Emmys happened, and they just obliterated
Mm-hmm.
the competition. If Andor can actually put Star Wars' name on an Emmy, and by that I don't mean like uh, best makeup and hairstyling for 30-minute show. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
mean best supporting actor, best directing, best script, best drama. I don't think it's gonna go away with best drama, but uh, if it
Mm-hmm.
could, that would be like, if Andor can win best drama next year, which by the way that is another whole other conversation, but if they can win that,
Mm-hmm.
just forget about it. If they get 0 views, Disney is popping the champagne
Mm-hmm.
just because of that. Because Star Wars needs a show that can uh, set a flagship for people, that can act as a flagship for people who do not follow the Mandalorian stuff,
Mm-hmm.
for people who do not follow, the Acolyte, for people who just care about an HBO like drama. And
Mm-hmm.
if Star Wars can do that, like, that will be huge for them.
Okay. So I agree with everything you said there. So Mando and Grogu comes out 2026.
Yeah.
Way too early projection right now. We've talked about this a little bit. Just given I don't know if we've talked about this though since the Acolyte did as poorly as it did streaming wise, and Star Wars's brand I think is much lower than it was 6 months ago, and I don't think it was in a great spot 6 months ago. A lot's going to change in the next year and a half too, but baseline number $500 million. Mando and Grogu. It makes 500 million. They popping champagne bottles, going absolutely nuts because the streaming show made half a billion.
Um, yeah, I was thinking more 600. I actually just thought
Okay.
of a great comparison here. Maybe you disagree, but I think this works in my mind. The comparison I came up with was the Batman in 22. The Batman was a movie that, like, it's not an apples to apples, but at the same time, it's a movie that they needed to get right, and they needed the fan base to rally around, and that was a movie they needed for the DC brand to be redefined in the eyes of uh, a large part of the audience. The last
Hmm.
Batman movies had not, well, at least the Zack Snyder
Right.
part of DC, like whether it was Justice League, whether it was Batman v Superman, or whatever it was, those were not working quality wise, and they just had to get a movie with a new actor that could just perform and be good.
Hmm.
And if Mando and Grogu can perform and can generate some positivity around the fandom, that will be a success. And that obviously is a bit of a difficult idea to grapple right now. Like, what? How do you even measure that? But yeah, like reaching 600 million, I think will be um, a giant success for them. I mean,
I think
obviously it depends
it's
on the
easy to
budget.
grapple what that looks like. It's me being able to just casually scroll through my Twitter feed and the entire discourse not be, people throwing haymakers at each other, which that's kind of what Twitter is. But at
Yeah.
the same time, whenever people really like something or something is really popular, there might be a few people out there, that are always going to be those detractors, but you don't see that. Like you just, for the most part, it's just like, oh my gosh, this and oh my gosh, that. But Star Wars is the most recent thing we have is just the Acolyte, or even at times Mando season 3 and some of the things that were going on there. Like I will never forget after watching the Mando, the Jack Black and Lizzo episode of Mando season 3. I will never forget watching that and then just going on Twitter and just seeing the discourse on there. Most of the people are on there like, what did I just watch? Like, like what? Like, it's mostly just like WTF? Like, what is this? I don't understand. And whatever
Hon-
you feel about that episode is whatever. But I just will never forget that. And I'm like, I'm hoping for the Mando Grogu movie, like we don't have something like that going on. Like, what we get out of the theater and it's mostly people just kind of saying, what did I just watch?
Honestly, that Jack Black episode was a bit interesting. I don't have such a strong memory of the aftermath on social media,
Hmm.
because I saw that episode, like, I think after lunch the day it came out, so like on the Wednesday or Tuesday night. I saw it on Wednesday after lunch, I think. And like a couple hours later, I was supposed to hop on the plane to go to London for the celebration. So to me the reaction was, okay, that episode wasn't
Hmm.
really very good. I hopped, like, logged into our Discord and said, okay, most people agree here, and then I just like finished packing up and got on
Yeah.
the plane. Like, I didn't really get the negativity around it. And then I saw the next
It
episode of
wasn't. I think it
Early on
was less. It
Celebration.
was. I wouldn't even call it pure negativity. Like it was more of just like pure confusion.
What the
I
hell?
think
Yeah.
it's like it was negative. It was like negative confusion. Like everyone just kind of going, What? Like did I really just watch this?"
Yeah, but I mean, I do remember a couple people at Celebration saying, so that episode wasn't like really very good, right? But it was like sixth or seventh priority thing on your
Right.
priority list of conversations there. Like, people had just
Yeah.
forgotten about it, and
Hmm.
people were just excited to see the next one, which they were
Of course.
screening early, and that was a huge episode for them as well.
Hmm.
I was able to see that, so I also forgot about the sixth one, and so on.
No, I agree. For Mando and Grogu, like I think if they can get people walking out just feeling pumped, just feeling hyped, like fist
Yeah,
bumping, like that was just an epic adventure. I think that does it right there for sure.
yeah. I mean,
So,
and we
mhm,
talked about this on Thursday, but they need something else later. They need another movie
mhm,
lined up. Whether it's 6 months, whether it's a year later, they need something else so that if people come out fist bumping each other, they can actually, you know, not even put a poster if it's a year later, but actually say, okay, next year you'll be back for another Star Wars movie, and it's gonna be this one, and they
Hmm.
actually have to deliver that.
Yes.
And
This should
it's
be
not
the
that,
precursor to the main event,
right,
really.
and it's not that this is another measure of success, but if they can actually manage to put a to for Mando and Grogu to be good, for people to enjoy it, and then have another movie that actually kicks off a new era of Star Wars movies, that will be why Mando and Grogu was such a big success,
Hmm.
because it actually managed to launch this new wave.
Hmm. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Tall task for sure. We'll see
Yeah.
if Disney's up for it, or if some of these other movies we have in the works right now make their way to join the others that have become one with the Force and passed out of all knowledge there. But Miguel, thanks for hopping on today. So we're recording this on a Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening Eastern time. What did you write about for your Sunday piece that people listening to this or watching on Monday can go back and check out for your weekly piece on Sundays?
Right, so I think we touched on a couple of the points that I
Hmm.
discussed, which was basically the variety piece and this. Well, actually, we discussed the THR piece, right? Which I also talked about for a little bit. There was also a variety piece last week on this idea that some studios are very concerned about the super fans going viral on Twitter or
Hmm.
TikTok, and basically pooping on their latest projects, which is kind of interesting as well because it's happening right now to WB with the Joker sequel. But it's also something that Star Wars has suffered from, and the fact that some studios are assembling these focus groups to test some ideas could
Hmm.
actually affect it. So the piece is called "Will Star Wars Surrender to the Online Mob?" Which should be this idea of just giving up and doing whatever YouTube wants to do next. I think you
Hmm.
posted a, a tweet about this on our Discord, which was a link to the monologue from, was it Parks and Rec?
It's Parks and Rec.
Yeah,
He's like, and there at the edge of the Star Destroyer is a ship. And stay with me on this. Like, we're gonna
yeah,
make a big jump here. Is Thanos, who
yeah.
has the time gem, and this is going to be the merging of the Marvel universe and the Star Wars universe. Everyone, and I'm
Right. So
like,
the big Patton Oswalt
yeah.
monologue from Parks and Rec, right?
The
Is
funny, the
that
funny
what
part
we're
about
leading
that
into?
The funny part about that scene is that it starts off with him talking about the return of Boba Fett. And he's like, the hand of Boba Fett reaches out of the sand and climbs his way back up from the depths and from the jaws of the creature. And I'm like, this is kind of what happened. So
Yeah.
he's one for one. He's one for one. Now, I don't think we'll be seeing Luke training Padwans with Darth Vader's lightsaber anytime soon. But I'm sure that there's a fan edit out there that has that queued up, ready to go if need be.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Join us here every Monday for a Star Wars conversation. Tune in on Thursdays to Star Wars Newsnet Live, 10 o'clock Eastern Time. And then on Saturdays, you can join Luke and I as we dive into the next piece of canon material, which this week we are done with Young Jedi Adventures. Thank the Force. I love Young Jedi Adventures, but I am ready to stop talking about it. And we are into the year 382 BBY, or sorry, 232 BBY still, and we are talking about Light of the Jedi this week, the first of a million High Republic novels that we'll be discussing now for the next several months. So check that out. I think we talked for an hour and 10 minutes about the Light of the Jedi. So if there's anything we missed, feel free to point it out. I don't think there is, but thank you everyone for tuning in. We will see you next time for Light and Life. Remember, everyone, we are all the Republic.